Hello, everyone. This is David Montgomery, a data journalist with NPR News, and I'm here to answer your questions about redistricting in Minnesota. I'll just give you a quick rundown of what redistricting is for those of you who are less familiar with this, and then we've got a lot of questions that have come in already, and more you can just leave in the comments. We've got a producer monitoring those, and they'll make sure that those questions get to me, and I'll answer as many of these questions as we have time for. All right. So every 10 years under the U.S. political system, we have a new census, which counts how many people live in each state, each city, county, all the way down to what's called the census block level, which is basically what it sounds like. Uh, and after the census is completed, states have to redraw their congressional and legislative district boundaries in order to equalize the population. So in Minnesota, for example, over the past 10 years, the metro area has grown more quickly than most of the rest of the state. That meant that the districts drawn in 2012 in the Twin Cities metro had more people in them than the districts out in rural Minnesota. So someone had to go redraw those districts to equalize that, to make those rural districts a little bit bigger so they could have more people, make those urban districts a little smaller, and generally equalize the population. This is officially supposed to be the responsibility of the legislature and the governor through the political process. But in practice, the legislature and governor are currently divided. Different parties control different houses of the legislature. There's no agreement about what new maps to pass. And so, as has happened for decades in Minnesota, the whole issue got punted to the courts. And just this week, on Tuesday, a panel of judges rolled out new maps that, as near as we can tell, there don't appear to be any court challenges filed, are going to be the maps that Minnesota has for the next decade. So I'm going to walk you through, just very briefly here, some of the changes that have been made. Some of them are relatively minor. Some of them are more significant. I'll talk about the balance impact this will have on the state's politics, and take the long list of questions that we have going in. So I'm just going to shift over to screen sharing now. Give me a minute. Screen sharing, there we go. All right, so you guys should be able to see this map right now. Let's toggle off some of these layers to make this easier to see. So here is the state's current political system. The maps that we have had for the past decade. We've got eight congressional districts. The first district is anchored in southern Minnesota. The second is in sort of the southern suburbs of the Twin Cities. The third is based in Minneapolis. The fifth is based in Minneapolis. The fourth is based in St. Paul. The third is the western suburbs of Minneapolis. The sixth is sort of the exurbs further out from the Twin Cities. And then the seventh is western Minnesota, and the eighth is northeastern Minnesota. And none of that has changed. None of that big picture. That's all the same. But with these new maps, we've had some changes. So the second district, which used to stretch out to the southeast, has lost that territory to the first district and now stretches to the southwest. The 8th district has expanded both to the west and the south. The 7th district has stretched south. All these urban districts have all had to shrink a little bit. And this will have some moderate changes. It's not a revolutionary change. You might have heard some states that have had what's called gerrymandering. That's where politicians draw maps that are heavily weighted toward one side. So you could have a state that's like 55% one party, but that party draws the map so that they win 80% of the seats. And there's nothing like that in Minnesota. These seats are generally seen as pretty fair, more or less, maybe a slight advantage to one party or the other, depending on the changing political situation. Also have new legislative districts. These are the current boundaries. And these are the new boundaries. It's sort of hard to tell at a glance what the difference is here. But you have the same general situation. A lot of the 135 state house districts and 134 state house districts and 67 state senate districts in the metro area had gotten too big. The ones in the rural areas had too few people. Those had to be equalized. This has a lot of impacts. For one thing, under the state constitution, lawmakers are required to live in the district that they represent. And if I'm a lawmaker and my district boundaries got changed on me, I might find myself in a new district. I might find myself sharing a district with another member of the legislature. That's happened to several dozen sitting lawmakers who all have to decide whether to retire, run for another office, or possibly run against one of their compatriots of the same or different party. These are going to be play out in conventions and primaries this year, and then the general election this fall will be the first taking place under this new map. So we got a couple of your questions I can start with right away. Let's see. So general question. Bruce asked, I think, before Tuesday, when we see the details of the Minnesota Senate and House districts, voters will need to know, see where their home puts them in the same district or a new one. This is, we now have that information. I'm going to show you a way that you can find on NPR's website more about which districts you're in. So let's get this article for you here. This is the fun of live television here. There we go. All right. So in our articles, we're gonna have this one: new political district map shake up Minnesota politics. At the bottom, we have a widget where you can type in your address and see how you were redistricted. So we can type in 480 Cedar Street. This is NPR's headquarters here. And we can see that that is, unsurprisingly, in downtown St. Paul, is in the 4th Congressional District, as all of St. Paul is. It's in State Senate District 65, or it was rather, in Senate District 65 and House District 65B. And that actually hasn't changed. It's still in those same districts. The boundaries have changed a little bit, and the percentages of the vote in each district that went to different parties has changed. We also have a little Wordle-inspired widget here. You can paste this into social media to share your districts. And that's available at nprnews.org. We've embedded this in several different redistricting articles. Here's another address we can put in. I can learn how to type. So here's a district. It's still in the 4th Congressional District. That's a little bit more competitive. So you can do that for your own house or your neighbors or famous people. You can see where Prince's home was, or the governor's mansion, or whatever you want. So with that done, we've got a couple more questions. Daniel asks, how do these changes affect the balance of power between the Twin Cities Metro and outstate Minnesota? That is hard. He's particularly interested in the legislative districts here. That's a little bit harder to do than congressional districts. We can just glance at a map and see sort of how the congressional districts have changed. And it's much harder with 67 or 134 districts than it is with 8. In general, there are now more districts representing the metro. I forget the exact number, but it's a couple more. And obviously, some districts sort of straddle the edge of the metro. And fewer districts representing rural Minnesota, although there's still plenty of rural districts. and in practice, because Democrats tend to be stronger in the metro area and Republicans tend to be stronger in rural areas right now, that maybe shifts a seat or two toward the lean Democratic side. But that said, any changes there are relatively minor compared to the impact of the political climate. Minnesota's legislative houses are still winnable by both parties. And in a favorable electoral environment for Democrats, like we had in 2020, when Joe Biden won the state somewhat comfortably, a majority of these districts out there are favored by Democrats, have more Biden voters than they do Trump voters. It's not to say it's impossible for Republicans to win in that situation. In fact, in 2020, they did just that in the Senate. They won a number of seats that Biden won and therefore won a majority. But in a less favorable electoral environment, like in 2016, when the state was just 50-50 basically, a very slight edge for Hillary Clinton, these seats, these maps do give Republicans a slight advantage. It's a couple percentage points. And that has to do with how the voters of the two parties are concentrated. In the most Democratic parts of the state, Joe Biden and other Democrats tend to get 80 or 90% of the vote in Minneapolis, St. Paul, etc. Whereas the Republican strongholds are often 70, 75%, which means that because you only need 51% to win, that means that the Democrat voters are less efficiently distributed and Republicans have a very slight advantage in an equal electoral environment. But that observation does bring up a question from Anonymous, who asks, what is the purpose of redistricting? It appears in this article it is only about Republicans or Democrats. I assume it should benefit the people who live and allow their vote to be heard. And that's a complicated question. The judges who drew the maps here officially did not look at partisanship or incumbents when they did so. They looked at population, they looked at racial ethnic groups, communities of interest, municipal and county boundaries, shared economic and cultural characteristics, as well as the status of the current maps. They explicitly declined to consider political balance or where incumbents live. That said, the data is out there, and everyone is paying close attention to it, and everyone is very interested about what impact this could all have on the 2022 elections. Again, Minnesota is not like some of these states where a gerrymandered map is going to have this massive swing, make it so a party can win a huge majority of districts with just a slight majority or even a minority of the vote. But there is intense interest on which party benefits because we do have a two-party dominant system. But all these are officially incidental to the rationale that lay behind these maps. Some people had argued that the court should consider this, should try to draw maps that reflect the partisan balance of the state. And that was a factor that they explicitly declined to consider. Let's see here. So here's a very specific question from Miranda asking about Meeker County. So Meeker County is broken up regarding the legislature. What is the city of Litchfield regarding the new House and Senate district? What city is the dividing line for the next district? So let's get this map back up, shall we? So let's bring up Meeker County here. And take a look at how it's split up. Again, I highly encourage you to. We have the full maps as well as all the interactive widget available on our website that you can access at mprnews.org. Right. So let's get Meeker County going. All right, so here's Meeker. Let's look at the Senate districts here. Can get rid of that. As soon as I remember where all the buttons are. This is Meeker County, which is currently split between the District 16, District 17, and District 29 in the state Senate, in the state House, District 16A, District 17A, and 29A. Sorry, yes, 29A. You'd asked about the specific cities. City of Litchfield, as you asked about, is currently in District 16A, or most of it anyway. A very small portion goes into 17A. The city of Darwin is firmly in 17A. The boundary here does not appear to run along any urban areas. It's just probably, I assume this is township boundaries. Dassel is in 17A. Kingston is in 29A. Grove City and Cosmos are in 16A, and Eden Valley is split between 13A and 16A. All right. Move on. Future questions. What are the most competitive districts? It's from Austin. So that's easiest to answer for the congressional map. Bring that up here. And in fact, we've got a nice graphic that is also on our website that can break this down pretty easily. If I just find which file. There we go. It's actually not. Here we go. So the most competitive district is the 2nd district, which is the South Suburban, currently represented by Democrat Angie Craig, where Joe Biden got about 53% of the two-party vote in 2020. Excuse me. That is generally seen as by far the closest, swingiest district. There are 2 other districts that are relatively close in the new boundaries. Both of them got slightly closer with how the counties and towns were shuffled around in redistricting. Those are the 1st district, which is southern Minnesota, and the 8th district, which is the Iron Range, as well as stretching west into west central Minnesota, or north central Minnesota, and south to the fringes of the metro. Both of these were won by Donald Trump in 2020, relatively comfortably, but not so out of reach that it's not possible for Democrats to win them. Slightly further afield, the 3rd district in the western suburbs of Minneapolis and the 6th district in the exurbs were pretty safely won by both Biden and Trump, respectively, but aren't quite so out of reach that in the right election they couldn't possibly be competitive. But right now, neither one looks very competitive. It's mostly the 2nd district, and then much more distantly the 1st and the 8th. Again, keep those questions coming in. Leave them in the comments. And our producer will gather them and pass them on to me. Sarah asks, do the new districts affect my current voter registration? Do I need to re-register? And where I'll be voting if I vote in person? The answer to the first question there is no. You do not need to re-register because of redistricting. Your voter registration is the same. Where you vote might change. Some of this is still going to be settled as the Secretary of State's office prepares precinct lines and polling places for the upcoming election. But polling places might change. If you're in a different district, a different precinct than you were before, you're very likely going to have to vote in a different place. We don't know the answers to all that yet. but don't assume that come the election that your polling place is the same as it was before. All right, let's keep going with more questions here. All right, so Carson asks, how is a decision like the one to include all reservations in one district made? So let's bring back the screen sharing here. So as Carson notes, we can toggle on the layer for reservations. All of the states, or almost all of the states' formal reservation tribal land, there's a couple of exceptions, but almost all of it was put in the 8th district. That's in contrast to the old map, where there are some big tribal lands that were in the 7th district and some that were in the 8th. The new map stretches the 8th out to the west to encompass all these tribal areas. And the answer to how that decision is made has to do with the formal decisions made by the judges about what were their priorities. They had a whole list of things that they said they would consider. This was the list that did not include politics. So, this include basic stuff like each district should have equal numbers of residents or as close as possible. They should be contiguous, no weirdly gerrymandered shapes where you have a district that includes 2 cities and a thin strip of land in between them. But one of their points was districts can't be drawn to infringe the voting rights of racial or ethnic minority groups or to divide Native American reservations more than is necessary. They also added that so-called communities of interest should be kept together where possible. This means that areas that share similar social, geographic, cultural, ethnic, economic, occupational, trade, transportation, or other interests should be put in a single district. And those principles informed the decision to put all the state's tribal lands, or almost all the state's tribal lands, into one district. Combined with, there's some arguments that were explicitly made during the lawsuits that were setting this up, where some of the advocates who were participating argued that it was important to concentrate tribal voters to maximize their ability to impact policy and to make their voice heard politically. Again, keep those questions coming. We're starting to run through the questions that we had over the past few days, but I'll stick around for at least another half hour and answer any questions you guys have. Let's see. So some of these questions, like Peter asked, where are the new state, Senate, and House district boundaries, which I showed. But further, where have state district lines changed? And the answer to that is pretty much everywhere. And look at the first district up here, for example, up in the corner of the state. Bring up the current map here. And select, if I can, there we go. So that's where the old 1st Senate district was. And now you can see that the 1st district stretches much further to the south because the population grew relatively slowly there. And so it had to expand south to take in a range of cities like, if I can find the right tool here, cities like Ada, Beltrami, Fertile, Twin Valley, Hendrum, etc. So the 1st district stretched down a lot closer to Moorhead than it used to do. So that happened a lot up in the down in the southern corner of the state. You had District 22. I'll select that. And here you can see the new district down there, which is actually renumbered to 21. Some of the numbering got mixed up, which can be a point of confusion, I found, for some people. People are confused that there must be an error with the maps or the widget that we made because it shows them in they live in the East Metro, but it shows them being in District 29, which is in the West Metro, or something like that. And but as a fact, the district's boundaries changed. Some of what used to be a particular district is not necessarily that same district anymore. But anyway, so this district down here, 22, is now replaced with 21, which stretches further both to the north. Well, actually not to the north, stretches further to the east. So that happened all over the place. And I can't go through all 67 Senate districts or all 134 House districts, in part because, unlike the congressional districts, the numbers did change. So you can't just compare the old 11th to the new 11th or something like that, because in some cases that's not going to work. Ralph asks, how have the neighborhoods and communities of North Minneapolis been impacted by state-level redistricting? So let's zoom in here. I'm going to filter to just bring up Minneapolis here. If anyone's curious, the program I'm working in right here is called QGIS, or QGIS, which is a free open source program for working with geographic data. Can be a little bit tricky to use, but is free and open source. And so I've got all these layers loaded in from various public domain sources. Let's lighten up the color here to make this easier to see. All right, so right now, toggle on the highways to make this a little easier to see. North Minneapolis is primarily represented by District 59 in the state Senate. And in the state House, you've got 59A in the northern part, and then 59B stretches out over into sort of the area, including some of the downtown area, it looks like. So Ralph is correct that 59B has had more of a northeast put into it. Will that dilute the BIPOC vote? That is a question that I have to take a more detailed look at. So if you will give me a moment, let's bring up the code and data. See if I'm able to answer this question for you now. And if this takes too long, I will move on to another question and maybe circle back. Welcome to the fun of a live research. Nope, doesn't look like I have this prepared at the moment. So I will maybe take a minute and hopefully circle back to you to answer that question about District 59B and how its racial makeup has changed. John asks a question about who's going to run, specifically in the District 9A in the House and Senate District 9. I don't think we know the answer to that question yet. A lot of legislative candidates were waiting for these new maps to be rolled out. And over the last few days, we had a lot of candidates either declaring that they're running again and in which district, or that they won't be running again. So that process is still shaping out. The filing deadline hasn't happened yet, but this process is underway. Dacia asks, is redistricting meant to make voters better represented? The underlying principle for redistricting, as defined by the Supreme Court and other cases, is what's called the rule of one man, one vote, one person, one vote. And the general idea is, unlike, at more distant American history, sometimes you would have districts that would be drawn with vastly unequal numbers of people, especially for the state legislature. There are some states, for example, gave a representative to every county. But of course, in Minnesota, you've got counties like Hennepin that have millions of people, or hundreds of thousands of people at least, and other counties that have just a few thousand people. So you can see how that might be unfair. And those maps were declared unconstitutional. And so the overriding principle is one person, one vote. There's also a principle that you can't draw maps to disadvantage particular racial or ethnic groups, protected classes under American jurisprudence. Again, a reaction to some of the Jim Crow laws, or maps that have been drawn to try to put, for example, all black vote, as many black voters as possible into a single district, or to split them up among many different districts, try to weaken their voting capability. So those are the general principles. The U.S. does not have a principle of political proportionality, not in Minnesota, not generally anywhere else, of trying to draw maps that reflect the political balance of the people, especially between the two major parties. None of that is officially considered. Let's see. Other questions? Let's see. Terrell asks about lawmakers who've been drawn to get redistricted into the same district as each other. And this is actually a really tricky question to answer because there's not a formal list of lawmakers' residences out there. Some lawmakers make their address public. Others list a PO box or just their office. So it's not always easy to figure out exactly where these lawmakers live to make comparisons. It involves a lot of trial and taking what is public and then cross-referencing it with other public records. It's a lot of work. But see, we have done some of this work. Let's see what I can give for you here. My colleague Brian Baxt did a write-up here. He found that there are more than 20 member versus member pair-ups in the state house, although some of those are incumbents who have previously already said they weren't going to run, that they were going to retire. The Senate has 9 member versus member districts, again, not counting some retirees. So there are some high-profile lawmakers who are thrown into the same district. For example, the Senate Democratic leader, Melissa Lopez Franzen, is in the same district as longtime DFL Senator Ron Latz. Latz is planning on running. Said he's planning on running again, and in that district, Franzen is contemplating what to do. She might get a new home across in a different district, one where more of her voters live, which is a thing that a lot of lawmakers do. Some people, once they get the district maps, they call a real estate agent. Some people make more of an effort to move than others. Some people actually uproot and move to a new home in the district where most of their voters live. Other people, lawmakers, have kept their old home but established a second home, and then it's a question of how much time you spend there. Last decade, there was a case of a lawmaker who was kicked off the ballot. A sitting lawmaker was ruled he couldn't run again because it turns out his ostensible residence in his district was not a place that he was ever living. So critics actually staked out the place and found that he never showed up, or almost never showed up, and he was kicked off the ballot. So lawmakers do have to at least make an effort, or at least not get caught. But there are a number of lawmakers who have several residences, and where their official residence is and where they spend most of their time may or may not line up, as lawmakers try to find ways to evade the requirement they live in their district without having to uproot their longstanding family home or something like that. Daisy asked a follow-up question. Did LGBTQ voters get treated more fairly? We don't have any data on voters by sexuality. That's just not something that's tracked. There are surveys that estimate it, but it's not something that I'm able to answer. I don't have any detailed knowledge of particular parts of the state that might have lots of LGBTQ voters. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question. I do have the data somewhere on districts by race, but to answer your earlier question, but I'm still trying to get that into a strong into a format that I can relate to you. Again, to get those questions in, I'll probably be wrapping up in about 10 or 12 minutes here. Able to answer whatever questions you've got. All right, here we go. No, that's not. Yeah, so there's a question about South Minneapolis. Let me toggle this back on. So South Minneapolis right now, we'll look at the Senate because that's a little simpler. There's sort of three districts in South Minneapolis. You've got District 61, which runs along the southwest part of the there we go. Southwest part of the city. District 62 is in the south center, and District 63, where I live, is in the south and southeast parts of Minneapolis. In the state house, you got 61A, which is sort of west central, includes parts of downtown there and the areas to the west along 394. 61B is southwest Minneapolis. 62A and 62B, then 63A. In fact, that shapefile for the Mississippi River is not very accurate. I'm just noticing that belatedly. So don't pay too much attention to that, and I'll try to find a better version for any future demos that I do. Let's see here. Population summary. Let me toggle this off so you don't have to see me working here. And I'm going to try in these next few minutes to get an answer for the question about districts by race. I will talk a little bit if people have other questions. A question about by gender. I believe we do have that, but it's usually not very interesting. Minnesota's pretty close to a 50-50 gender split in most areas, and some places might be 52% male or 52% female, but that just does not end up being very statistically interesting. There are some questions, some interesting questions of gender by age, or gender by or things like college education, where, for example, our college-educated white women live, is a politically salient question. But for that, some of that we don't have a lot of great data, or have at best only approximate data. So I'm just doing a little quick coding here to try to answer your question. Unfortunately, I had hoped the official PDF reports that the court put out would be able to answer that easily, but they do not. So let's get that. And so we do have the population by race for all of these districts. And because it was not categorized for us, I'm going to have to do it myself. There's a couple different ways these are actually processed, but let's see here. Just a moment. All right. So let's group by the new legislative districts. I can toggle this on now that I'm no longer quite floundering. So if you want to, you can see my code if that's the kind of thing that you're interested in. All right, so here are the districts, and I've calculated the percent of each district that each state legislative district that is white. And there's a particular question about 59A versus 59B. So 59A, so simplify this math here for me. 59A is one of the the districts with the highest populations of people of color. So about 67% Black, Native American, Asian, Hispanic, etc. Behind only 65A and 67A. 65A is in St. Paul. 67A as well is over there in the East Metro. 59B is currently 45% white, 55% people of color. And we can compare that to the old district. If you just give me a moment. Happy to answer your questions. Okay. I see the problem. This must be scintillating for you. My apologies to everyone who is still hanging around. Doing my best to answer all your questions for you. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to group by the old legislative district. So we've got current 59B. Toggle off that highway there. Versus the new 59B, which is shifted a little bit to the north, actually. The old version was stretched further to the south. So if we look at 59B, its makeup of racial makeup did not actually change very much. It was about 45.6% white, and the new version is about 44.5% white. So it actually got slightly more diverse through the redistricting process. It's a very convoluted way to answer your question. But I believe that's almost all the questions here. So I'll just hang out for about another minute here to give you a chance to get any questions in. If you have any questions that didn't get answered here, feel free to send me a message on Twitter at DH I monitor that and will do my best to answer any questions that come in. All right, well, everyone, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon to take a look at redistricting in Minnesota. Happy to have answered as many questions or not answered as many questions as the case may be. And keep those questions coming at me. We'll certainly be covering the fallout from these new maps as time goes on. I just will note as a final twist, I'm not sure if you didn't see the news today, U.S. Representative Jim Hagedorn, who represented the first district in Minnesota, died last night after a battle with cancer. So there's going to be a special election to fill the final few months of his term. And my understanding is, you can read all about this at nprnews.org, is that the special election, which is going to happen at the same time as the primary election for this fall, the special election will happen under the old district lines, and the general election will happen under the new district lines. And these are going to be happening pretty much at the same time. There's going to be an interesting little twist here. The first district changed a little bit. I'll bring this up and just so you can see more clearly. It lost a bunch of the territory it used to have in the rural area southeast of the Twin Cities. It gained a bunch of territory in the southeast of the Twin Cities. It lost some area in central Minnesota and along its in southwestern Minnesota. So most of the district is still the same. It still has Rochester, Mankato, the whole southern part of the state. But you're going to have two elections coming up for two similar but slightly different districts, and it'll be interesting to see how that shapes out. Thank you again for following along. And remember to visit nprnews.org and tune in to NPR News for updates on redistricting and everything else to do with Minnesota politics and all the other news. Thank you, everyone. Have a good Friday and good weekend.